There are a number of sociological studies that have been done that actually indicate that religious practice, being part of a religion, is actually good for your mental health. I mean, it's hard to be perfectly exact with a science like sociology. There's a lot of variables involved, but generally speaking, it seems to indicate that religious people have generally better mental health than non-religious. Doesn't mean, of course, that there are no religious people who struggle with depression or schizophrenia or other issues, of course. But it does mean that generally speaking, we have better mental health. We don't know, of course, whether it's a matter of correlation or causation, which is just a fancy way of saying we don't know whether it's because people with good mental health are more likely to be religious or because religion causes better mental health, but it's a good indication. But is that always the case? Have there been people who have been damaged by their Christian faith, by their practice of Christianity? Absolutely there have. And we cannot deny that, and we ought not to ignore the fact that it has happened. And I'm not just talking about people who have been damaged because of, say, physical or sexual abuse by church leaders. I know that kind of thing has happened. It is terrible that it has happened. Even once would have been too much. And churches must do whatever they can to prevent that and to prosecute those who have perpetrated such crimes. But that's not what I'm concerned about today. I'm concerned about other things in the life of the church that have actually damaged people, that we need to pay attention to, that we need to do whatever we can to eliminate. And so for that reason, I've decided to dedicate my sermons during the month of January to what I call toxic Christianity. I'm talking about Christianity that has gone wrong. Recently there was a book that came out and it included this quote from someone who identified himself as a former evangelical Christian. "I am 30 years old," he wrote. "I am struggling to find sanity between Christian schools, homeschooling, Christian group home, indoctrinating work camp, different churches in different cities. I am a psychological, emotional, and spiritual mess." It happens. There are people who have been deeply damaged by their participation in the life of the church, in their Christian faith and religion. So I think we need to talk about toxic Christianity. We need to talk about when it goes wrong. And I want to be clear here, though, when I say it's about toxic Christianity, I am not trying to target any particular brand of Christianity. It is not something that plagues only certain denominations. It is not something that plagues only certain approaches to God, whether they be evangelical or fundamentalist or liberal. I'm talking about a poison that can affect any church, that can infect us and damage us and hurt us. And we need to face up to that reality. Jesus came to this earth and he came to proclaim a message. And what did he call that message? He called it good news, gospel in Old English. And if it's good news, that means it needs to have a positive effect on the world and on those who embrace it. And so if that fails to happen, if some people are negatively impacted by that message or by the way we live it out, we are not following what Jesus intended. We are not what Jesus called us and made us to be as the church. And so I think the main thing we need to do to avoid toxic Christianity is to look at the toxins that Jesus warned his people against. And number one on that list has to be issues around authority. You read through what Jesus said, what he was concerned about. The issue of authority came up again and again and again. again, Jesus had some problems with how the people in his society used their authority. Now, surely Jesus understood that there was a need and a place for authority. Jesus himself, we are told in the Gospels, exercised authority. He exercised authority over demons and over various illnesses, we are told. We are also told that Jesus gave to his disciples authority when he left them. In fact, it says he gave them all authority in heaven and on earth. So Jesus understood there was a place for authority. Jesus even spoke of the position of authorities in his own society. We're told in the Gospel of Matthew that he said, the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, listen to what they say and follow it. Yes, he understood that there was a place for authority. But he also understood that when authority went bad, when it went toxic, it could be very destructive. And he warned his followers against that. Now, in our reading this morning, the particular warning that Jesus gives is against titles. So Jesus speaks to his followers and he says, "Among you, you shall not have people called rabbi, or instructor, or father." So what does that mean? Does that mean if we just are careful not to use titles for positions in the life of the church, that will be good? I mean, that would be wonderful. Just, avoid using certain titles and we will never run into toxic authority. But I don't think that's what Jesus meant. I think he was trying to get at something deeper than that. The issue with toxic authority is this. It is when we take anything earthly, anything temporal, and invest it with ultimate authority. And that includes various titles and positions. Yes, we need titles and positions in our churches. We need people to step into roles like minister and elder or whatever it may be. But when we start to invest those people with ultimate authority, with those positions with ultimate authority, we run into trouble. And you may say, well, that could never happen, but it has and it does. The worst case I can think of is a case of a man named Jim Jones. Now, Jim Jones started out his career as a Methodist minister, a tradition not all that far removed from our own. Now, from those beginnings, he went on to many other churches and religions and theological approaches to life. He strayed far from his Christian roots, but I don't think that's what his real problem was. His real problem was something that was with him right from the very beginning, and it was a tendency that he had to take all authority unto himself. And I think it was that led to his theological and his other errors. For example, eventually Jim Jones, who began as a Christian minister, ended up in a place where he rejected the existence of God altogether. He did not believe in God. But he did not reject God because of philosophical reasons or for rational reasons. No, he rejected God because he didn't need him anymore. Because Jim Jones had found another authority that was higher than God for him. And that other authority was, of course, Jim Jones himself. What need had he for God? But all authority belonged to him. You see, that's the problem with toxic authority. When we start to take things, possessions, people, as ultimate authorities, what we are doing is we are placing them in the position of God, and that is dangerous. There's a good reason why the first and greatest commandment is this: you shall have no other gods before me. Because God understands our tendency to want to replace him, to find things that we can touch and hold and become and make them our ultimate authorities. So God warns us against replacing him, but we still do it. We still create our idols. We still want to replace God. Now, I'm sure you've all heard how the story of Jim Jones ended. It ended in a place called Jonestown, Guyana, where Jones, together with 900 of his followers, all committed suicide together. He, with a bullet through his head, they, after drinking fruit-flavored drink laced with cyanide and other toxins. A more horrible end we could not imagine. It was terrible. It was so bad, in fact, that it brought a new phrase into our English language. To this very day, decades later, if someone says they drank the Kool-Aid, we all know what that means. It means that someone gave themselves over to a temporal authority, assigned over their thought processes, their full obedience to an authority that was not worthy of that. It means toxic authority. And I know that Jim Jones is obviously a very extreme case, but there are too many cases in the history of the church of people who stepped into certain positions and then gathered more and more authority unto themselves until they began to replace God. It is toxic, it is deadly, and we need to be on guard against it. But sometimes it's not people that we invest with that kind of ultimate authority. Sometimes it is things. And in many ways that's worse, because when we invest ultimate authority in a thing, that is very close to idolatry. And we do that in the church. Absolutely we do that. Sometimes we do that with our traditions. I know. One of the things that we have a particular problem is with this. A certain book. We have this tendency to want to invest ultimate authority in this book, and that is also dangerous. I want to be clear here. I do believe that the Bible is authoritative for us. That we need it. We need it to guide us. We need it to correct us. We need it to show us the way. But when we begin to make the Bible our ultimate authority, we will run into trouble. See, the Bible was not meant to be our ultimate authority. It was meant at best to be our penultimate authority. And I know that penultimate's not a word that we use a lot, but all that penultimate means is the one before the ultimate. So if the Bible is our penultimate authority, what that means is we can look to the Bible, not to find the truth in it itself, but to point us towards the truth. And so we can look to the Bible and we can find it pointing us to God. We can find it showing us Christ, who reveals God to us. But once we start to think that the Bible itself contains the truth, we're going to run into trouble. The reason why we run into trouble when we invest ultimate authority in a thing, even a good, wonderful thing like this, is because it is a thing. Because you can hold it. You can hold it in your hand. You can open it and read something and say, wow, there it is, ultimate truth. And that's dangerous because the tendency, the temptation, therefore, becomes, well, I possess the truth. It is mine. It is mine under my control, and I can use it for whatever purposes. It becomes something that we can possess. And that's dangerous. When we make God our ultimate truth, that's not a danger. Because no matter how much you learn about God, you never come to the end of it. You cannot grasp God. You cannot fully understand God. You cannot possess God. You can only be possessed by Him. And so you never fall into that temptation of thinking you can control the truth. You can only be controlled by it. But when it's a thing, even a good and wonderful thing, that is the temptation. That is the problem. The other problem is when we invest a thing with ultimate authority is this. It destroys something within us that God has put within us. Because you see, God has created us as beings who are meant to question, who are meant to wonder and try to understand. We have this gift from God, a gift for critical thinking. But when you invest ultimate authority in a thing that you can open and possess and point to, the effect is that that tends to crush critical thinking. I mean, what need have you for critical thinking when you have the truth in your hand? And so we tend to destroy critical thinking. Critical thinking becomes something to be feared, something to be put down. I'm sure you've heard the story of Galileo. Galileo, a long time ago, grew up in a world where the established truth was that the earth was at the center of the universe, and that all heavenly bodies, including the sun, turned around the earth. People knew that was the truth because the authority, the scriptures, assumed that was how the universe worked. And since they were the authority, they must be true. But Galileo, what did he do? He went out and he built a telescope and he looked into the skies, and what he saw there, because he was an intelligent and questing man, was something that he could not explain according to the established truth. And using his God-given critical thinking, Galileo began to form a new picture of the universe, a picture of a solar system where the sun was at the center and the earth and other planets moved around it. That was the truth that Galileo found through critical thinking. But it was a dangerous truth, because it seemed to contradict the established authority, and so Galileo was brought up on trial by the Inquisition. And he was forced by the Inquisition to recant his so-called heresy and to stand there before the judges and declare that yes, the earth did not move, that it was the center of the universe, everything moved around it. And yet we are told that Galileo muttered under his breath, and yet it moves. And yet it moves. Because he knew that no earthly authority, no earthly thing can overcome the truth. And he was right. I do believe that the Christian church is and is meant to be and will be a great source of good for this world and for every person who takes that faith as their own. And when that doesn't happen, we have strayed far from what Jesus has intended us to be. One of the problems we have is authority. And when we begin to invest authority, ultimate authority, in things that are not ultimate, whether it be things, whether it be titles and positions, whatever it may be. As long as we recall, however, that our ultimate authority is to be found in God, whom we cannot grasp, who we will never come to an end of understanding, I think we will be safe from this toxic sort of authority that would threaten to destroy us and our ministry in this world. In coming weeks, we will look at some of the other toxins that might threaten us. But for the moment, please take a few moments in silence